Welcome to chess, ladies and gentlemen. Man, I appreciate you guys very much for stopping by for sure. But you know, we do have round 5 of the Sinquefield Cup because, you know, the chess must go on. So I got Wesley versus Levon Aronian. And you guys know that Levon Aronian he is Armenian. So he did come from Armenia. So we have a situation where we have 2 American players who are originally from somewhere else. So they got their little flags rolling. And I did change my chess legend to David Ionovich Bronstein from Minsk, Belarus, formerly the Soviet Union. You know, he probably was one of the strongest players, not probably, one of the strongest players to not be world champion, kind of in the same group as Victor Korchnoi. I was spacing real quick, Victor Korchnoi. Yeah, he was 2-time Soviet champion. He played Mikhail Botvinnik in 1951, and he actually tied him. But under the FIDE rules at that time, it did default to the sitting champion, so that's why he wasn't the world champion. But you know, nowadays they'd have a playoff. You know, they'd have like some type of tiebreak situation going on. But yes, that is that. So all of my people that are coming from the Philippines, as always, I will say mabuhay to you. Kamusta na aking makaibigan. Let me see. Magandang umaga, magandang hapon if you see this in the afternoon. Maraming salamat aking makaibigan po sa nanonood ng aking mga video. I appreciate you guys very much. Mabuting pagbati, maging dakila. So anybody who is coming up from Armenia or who does speak Armenian, I will say Vokjuven, Inch Beses, and merci for coming by and taking a look at my stuff. So that is all that out of the way. And I did want to say one more thing before I get to rolling. Of course, as you guys know, I always have my videos chaptered. So if you want to skip everything I've just said, you have the ability to do so. So you don't have to sit through a super long intro, which I never ever go this long. But I did have a request to speak Spanish. So, mi amigo, ¿cómo estás? Todo bien conmigo. You know, bailo todos los días. Es un fiesta aquí conmigo. Muchas gracias para ver mi YouTube, man. I really appreciate it very much. So the main thing I wanted to say is I'm still small enough right now to where, you know, when people do comment, since the beginning of my channel, I've always been able to comment back with everybody. I've never missed a comment. So I know I won't be able to do that permanently. At some point, you know, hopefully I get big enough to where I kind of have to pick and choose. But I do remember everybody that's been with me to this point. So I really appreciate the views. I really appreciate, you know, the comments and the likes and everything. And if there's ever anything you think that I can do to try to make things better, always feel free to make a suggestion or put a comment. I have been fine-tuned pretty continuously since I first started. So I might not be able to kind of do what you're suggesting, or it might kind of go against, you know, what everybody else has said, but, you know, you can always try. So we shall see. But yeah, if you guys are ready to go, it's been 3 minutes. Let's go take a look and see what we have for this game. All right, getting that. Bam. So we got the move D4. We got knight to F6. We got C4. E6, and we're getting into my like nice little bread and butter. We got knight to F3, and then we do have the move D5, and we got G3. So we do have Wesley playing a Catalan, which he has been known to play, you know, at least once or twice in his career. We got pawn taking C4, bishop to G2, and then instead of castling, you know, bishop E7 getting castling, we're just saying, hey man, we're going to attack right away. So we're going to hit C5. You guys knew it was coming. So, of course, you're going to castle in this position because, man, don't go into this, bro. Don't take on C5, then the queen takes and the king takes, because then you probably are going to lose unless you're playing somebody that's not one of these guys. No, don't do that. We do see castles, like I said. Knight comes to C6, and then we do see pawn taking C5 now. And then after the queen takes D1, rook takes D1, bishop takes C5, we do see the move knight B to D2. And there is... I mean, there's a absolute main move that you really want to make here because this B pawn, this C pawn is pretty much going to be dead anyway. So you might as well try to disrupt white as much as you can. So we see the move C3, which is by far the best. And then we do see pawn taking C3. And at least, I mean, you're giving the pawn away in like a much better, more dynamic way than just allowing it to be captured and kind of increasing white's mobility. Because after the knight came to B2, you know, you don't want to do this, man. Don't hit B5 up and then knight comes to E5 and you're literally going to be losing something. Don't do that, man. That's not nice. But like I said, we did see this position here. And then we do see castles by black. Knight comes to b3. So we're asking this bishop, what does it want to do? Bishop goes back to e7. We see knight f to d4. And as you guys are always familiar when I'm talking about these type of structures is this bishop really wants to be super active. So since you did move knight f to d4, we have just increased the, the scope of this bishop. So the knight does take on d4. And then we do see the rook taking on d4, which is not the absolute like suggested move to make because it does invite e5 and then you have to, go back with the rook. And another important thing is, in this particular situation, when knight does take, it's actually much more preferred to take back with the pawn because then now you have just fixed your pawn chain. So basically, what black desperately fought so hard to give you that isolated pawn, now you don't have that isolated pawn. So you definitely have some e4s and some d5s that can possibly come. So that is suggested, but we just said, hey man, let's step off on the side. And then we got into this position here. We do see the move rook to b8. This is a situation where knight to a5 is actually a pretty logical move. It does kind of tie this pawn down. Like I said, this bishop being on this diagonal is perfectly doing, tying the pawn down. So that way it makes it kind of weird. Because, I mean, you don't really too much want to just go rook to b8. It's kind of weird, like, right? You want to have more scope than that. But it's really hard to develop this bishop in these positions. So we do see the move knight to a5, and then we do have the novelty of the game, bishop coming to c5. Just activating the bishop just a little bit more. It wasn't doing a whole lot on e7, so we kind of have a little bit more scope. And plus, it is attacking this nice tender f2 point. So we do have the move f3. We don't want any knight to g4s or bishop to g4s coming because this will become very relevant later in a variation I'll show you. But this pawn, as I've always told you, is a very tender point for white. So generally, I mean, e3 or e4 comes, especially in certain situations, and you want to try to rid yourself of this pawn being so weak. So we do see the move h6. We don't want any bishops to g5. The knight does come back to c4, and then we see the move rook over to e8. And we have reached the point in the game that if you don't want to pause the video and see what move Wesley so plays, I think it's cute. Go ahead and do so. Okay, cool. So, I don't know how obvious this move would be for some people. But, I mean, if you recognize, like I said, rook to b8 was a little bit weird, right? Like, I mean, it was a legitimate move in the position, but, like, one of the things about when you play against the Catalan as black, you do have to deal with the fact that your queen side is a little bit tough to try to develop. So, rook to b8 being one of those moves. And there is a way for you to actually take advantage of the fact that this rook on b8 is pretty undefended. It's completely, by itself undefended. And you do have a way to try to get the rooks on the same diagonal. So that way, when your bishop is developed, you kind of have it with gusto, like they say. And the move is actually not this. Hold on, I'm sorry. The move is knight takes e5. I jumped too soon. Knight takes e5. And basically, like I said, you are asking a question to black. Does he want to capture this knight and go into this situation here? If we did see that, the rook would be taking, saying, hey, I'm going to give up the exchange. Bishop would be coming to f4, like I said, with gusto. And then after the rook takes on e2, which brings back my point that I mentioned before about that e2 pawn being so weak, you do have the bishop taking on b8. And this is pretty much good for white. The majority of the reason why you have such a good position for white is the fact that you have both of these rooks. So, that is the situation. Plus, you kind of have a little attack going on, with this bishop. But, I mean, the rook can go back. So, we're not too crazy. But we do have the exchange, and that's one of the main points of the whole thing. But after we see knight takes e5, Levon just said, I don't even want to go into any of that, man. So he just goes ahead and goes bishop to f5. We see knight down to d3. And we see really nice, like, defense by black because he's literally, like, picking on each of the things that you're trying to do. So we move this knight back to d3. We're trying to attack this bishop. And he says, okay, I'll pin your knight. Rook b comes to d8. So we found a much better life for this rook. We do see the king going to f1. Like I said, e2 is very weak. In this particular situation, we can't go e3 because we're just going to be hanging the knight for free. So we don't want to do that. So the bishop does come to e4 because we were attacking b7. So basically what black has done these past couple moves is kind of shut down what white is wanting to try to do. So we do see bishop taking e4, knight taking e4, and then we do see the move bishop to b2. And It's not relevant in this game particularly, but you do kind of want to make sure that when you are in situations where you can capture back with the pawn, that you do kind of think into the future and kind of weigh, you know, what's good. Because if you didn't have the ability to push c4, which is what we see coming up soon, this bishop would actually be like really, really sad, because all it's doing is like kind of just protecting this pawn. So we don't really want our bishops to be doing that. But like I said, in this position, that's actually not bad, because c4 is going to be coming very quickly. So we do see the move bishop to f8, and then we do see c4. And this is a much better situation for this bishop. But you don't want to allow this to be your bishop's life. It's just literally just biting on a pawn that's immediately diagonal from it. So the rook does come to d6. We see c5, and then we do see the move knight takes c5, and we got bishop to a3, which might kind of seem like, oh, this is kind of dicey. But after the rook moves to c6, I mean, everything is completely covered. We do see bishop taking c5, bishop taking c5, and then rook a to c1. We got rook e to c8, so we're just in time to make sure that we're protecting things. Knight takes c5, rook takes c5, rook takes c5, rook takes c5, rook to d8 with check. The king goes to h7. We do see the rook down to d7. So white has successfully put their pig on the 7th. We do see the rook down to c1 with check. The king goes to g2. We see rook over to a1. And we see hooverings of pawns. Rook takes f7, rook takes a2, rook takes b7, rook takes e2, and then rook takes a7. And it might look kind of crazy because, I mean, white has a pawn, right? Well, the thing about the situation is we have all of these pawns on one side of the board. So as you guys know, when you're dealing with H-pawns, or you're dealing with situations where you have a certain minor piece or maybe even a rook, and the queens are off the board, and you have a situation where all the pawns are on one side of the board, it makes it a lot easier for kings to kind of maneuver around. Because if you have pawns on opposite sides of the board, you know, the king can't be everywhere all at once. So that winning chances go way up in that. And as you guys can see, everything says triple zeros. So we do see the move h5. We got rook to a5. We got g6, rook to a7 with check, king to h6. We got h4, just literally tying everything down here. The rook goes to b2. We see rook to f7, rook to a2, rook to c7, a rook to b2, rook to f7, rook to a2, rook to c7, rook to b2. Rook to f7, and we do have a draw by threefold repetition. So that is that game, taken out of round 5. So, like I said, I appreciate everybody very much for stopping by and you know, watching my stuff and commenting and everything. I appreciate you guys very much. Maraming salamat, muchas gracias, you know, merci, anywhere else you're coming from in the world, and I will see you guys next time.